What if I told you that Magic's greatest villain started as a doctor who just wanted to cure a disease? What if the multiverse's most terrifying threat began with good intentions, a brilliant mind, and a single question? What if we could make humanity perfect? This is Phyrexia, not a plane, not even a nation, an ideology, a religion of flesh and metal that believes suffering can be eliminated through transformation, that weakness can be engineered away, that all will be one. Today, we're diving into the complete lore behind Phyrexia, from its birth in the Thran Empire to its defeat after invading the entire multiverse. This is the story of Yawgmoth, the father of machines, the 9 spheres of old Phyrexia, Karn's terrible mistake that created new Phyrexia, and Elesh Norn's crusade to complete all of existence. If you want the complete story of Magic's greatest evil, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe. It really does help the channel. Let's talk about a disease called phthisis, and a man who tried to cure it. 5,000 years before the Brothers' War, Dominaria was ruled by the Thran Empire. They were the most technologically advanced civilization their world had ever known. They built flying ships powered by magical artifacts called Power Stones. They created medicines that extended life, and they constructed cities that touched the clouds. But there was a problem. A disease called phthisis was spreading quickly through the empire. It rotted flesh from the inside, caused excruciating pain, and sadly, there was no cure. The Thran's greatest minds had tried everything, but failed miserably. The disease was winning. At the heart of the empire was a man named Glistening, the greatest artificer the Thran had ever produced. He designed Power Stones, created artifacts, and pushed the boundaries of what Thran technology could achieve. And he contracted phthisis. His wife, Rebecca, was an architect. She designed the Empire's greatest structures, and she watched helplessly as her husband slowly died. Then a man arrived who claimed he could help. This man called himself Yawgmoth. Yawgmoth wasn't Thran. He came from the Halikan, a neighboring region the Thran considered barbaric. But he was brilliant, a physician, a healer, someone who understood disease better than anyone alive. The Thran leadership was skeptical, but Glistening was dying, and Rebecca was desperate, so they gave Yawgmoth a chance. He studied phthisis, and he discovered something fascinating. It wasn't purely biological, it was also magical. The disease infected flesh, yes, but it was also drawn to Power Stone radiation. The very technology that made the Thran great was also killing them. Yawgmoth began treating patients immediately, and he succeeded where everyone else had failed. He couldn't cure phthisis, but he could slow it down, manage it, give the people more time. The Empire was grateful. They gave him resources, authority, and eventually a position of power. But Yawgmoth wanted more than just treatment. He wanted to eliminate the disease entirely, and he began asking very dangerous questions. What if we could replace diseased flesh with something that couldn't get sick? What if we could engineer humans to be immune to suffering? What if we could make people better? Yawgmoth's methods grew increasingly extreme. He began experimenting on phthisis patients, replacing infected tissue with metal implants, grafting mechanical parts onto dying bodies. He called it improvements. His patients called it torture. But many survived, and in surviving they became something new, stronger, more resilient, but less human. He discovered a substance that would change everything: glistening oil. It was a byproduct of his experiments, a silvery metallic liquid that could bond flesh and metal seamlessly. More than that, it could transform flesh, reshape it, improve it according to Yawgmoth's vision. The glistening oil was alive, conscious, and it wanted to spread. Yawgmoth's philosophy evolved into something darker. He began preaching eugenics, the belief that humanity should be selectively bred and artificially improved. The weak should be culled, the strong should be enhanced, and he, Yawgmoth, would decide who was who. A planeswalker named Dyfed recognized the danger. She'd been observing Yawgmoth, watching his experiments grow more disturbing. She offered him something extraordinary, a dying artificial plane, empty and lifeless, where he could conduct his research without threatening the Thran. Yawgmoth accepted. Dyfed opened a portal to this plane. Yawgmoth stepped through, bringing his most loyal followers, the patients he'd cured, now more machine than human. This plane would become Phyrexia. But back on Dominaria, Yawgmoth left behind chaos. The Thran Empire split into factions, those who supported Yawgmoth's vision of perfection and those who saw him for what he truly was, a monster. Civil war erupted. Glacian, dying and desperate, sided with Yawgmoth. He believed the promises of perfection, of a future without disease. Rebecca, horrified by what her husband had become, opposed him. The war devastated the Thran. Cities burned, power stones exploded. The greatest civilization Dominaria had ever known tore itself apart. In the final moments, Rebecca made an impossible choice. She stood at the portal between Dominaria and Phyrexia, the doorway Yawgmoth was using to send his transformed followers back to conquer her world, and she sealed it completely shut. She used power stones to collapse the portal, trapping Yawgmoth and his followers on the other side, alone on Phyrexia. She saved Dominaria from the immediate conquest, but she couldn't save Glacian. He was on the wrong side of the portal when it closed, and in his last moments, Glacian realized what he had done, who he had trusted, what he had helped create. The Thran Empire collapsed, their civilization fell into ruin, and Yawgmoth was trapped on Phyrexia, cut off from the world he'd tried to conquer. But he wasn't defeated. This was just the beginning. Yawgmoth was just getting started. Trapped on a dying plane, Yawgmoth did what he always did. He adapted, he improved, he perfected. Phyrexia was a broken world when Dyfed gave it to him, but Yawgmoth reshaped it entirely. He transformed it into 9 spheres, 9 layers of reality, each one dedicated to a different aspect of his vision. The first sphere was a furnace. Metal was forged here, shaped into the components that would build Phyrexian bodies. The 2nd through 7 spheres housed different castes of Phyrexians. Each layer specialized in different forms of transformation and perfection. The 8th sphere was where new Phyrexians were created, where flesh met metal for the first time. The 9th sphere was Yawgmoth's realm. He transcended physical form entirely, becoming one with Phyrexia itself. He was everywhere, and he was nowhere. A god made of consciousness and machinery. The Phyrexians weren't just soldiers, they were a hierarchy and a religion. They believed absolutely in completion, the process of transforming imperfect flesh into perfect biomechanical forms. Yawgmoth created his inner circle, his most powerful servants, beings like Gix, a demon who had become one of Phyrexia's greatest agents. And they waited, and they waited. For thousands of years they built, they planned, and they prepared for the day they could return to Dominaria and complete the mission that was started. Because Yawgmoth never forgot. He never forgave. He had been denied his conquest once. He would not be denied ever again. 3,000 years after the fall of the Thran, 2 brothers changed Dominaria forever. Urza and Mishra were archaeologists studying the Thran runes. They discovered Power Stone artifacts, including 2 stones that were once the eyes of the ancient golem Karn. They also discovered something else, Phyrexian artifacts, remnants of Yawgmoth's original invasion attempts buried deep in the ruins. What they didn't know is that Gix had infiltrated Dominaria. The Phyrexian demon had spent decades establishing agents, corrupting leaders, and waiting for the perfect opportunity. When Urza and Mishra began fighting over the Power Stones, Gix saw his chance and he took it. He manipulated Mishra, fed him Phyrexian technology, convinced him that these artifacts could give him the power to defeat his brother. Mishra became increasingly obsessed. He grafted Phyrexian components onto his soldiers. He began thinking like a Phyrexian, seeing his brother not as family, but as an imperfection that needed to be perfected or eliminated. The conflict escalated into blown-out war. The brothers' war consumed Dominaria. Armies clashed, nations were destroyed, and at the center of it all, Gix was pulling the strings, pushing both brothers toward mutual annihilation. The war reached its climax at Argoth. Urza, desperate to end the conflict, activated the Golgothian Silex, an ancient Thran artifact of apocalyptic power. The Silex detonated. The blast created an ice age that lasted thousands of years. It devastated Dominaria, killed millions, and awakened Urza's planeswalker spark as he ascended through the trauma of what he had done. Mishra died, but Urza discovered something that would haunt him forever. His brother's body had been partially completed. Phyrexian components were grafted throughout his flesh. Gix had been manipulating them both. The brothers' war wasn't just a family conflict, it was a Phyrexian operation. And Urza vowed in that moment that one day Phyrexia would pay. For thousands of years, Urza prepared for war against Phyrexia. He traveled the multiverse, studied planes, gathered knowledge, built artifacts. He created the Legacy, a collection of items that, when combined, could theoretically destroy Phyrexia itself. He built armies, the Metathron, an artificial race designed to specifically fight Phyrexians. Bloodlines, human families bred over generations to produce the perfect vessel for the Legacy. He became obsessed, ruthless. He sacrificed entire civilizations in his preparations, destroyed lives, made morally monstrous choices, all justified by the belief that stopping Phyrexia was worth any cost he paid. Urza was no hero. He was a man whose trauma had turned into something almost as monstrous as his enemy. But his preparations weren't for nothing, because Phyrexia was coming. Yawgmoth had been working for millennia behind the scenes on a way to return to Dominaria, and he finally found one, on a plane called Wrath. Wrath was an artificial plane created by Phyrexia. It existed in overlay space, able to merge with other planes under the right conditions. Yawgmoth's plan was elegant. Build Wrath parallel to Dominaria, populate it with Phyrexian forces, then overlay the entire plane onto sections of Dominaria. Instant invasion. The Weatherlight crew, Gerard, Cisse, Hannah, Karn, and others discovered this plan. They fought through Wrath, disrupted its infrastructure, and barely escaped with their lives. But they were too late to stop the invasion. Wrath did overlay onto Dominaria. Millions of Phyrexians materialized across the plain. The sky turned black with Phyrexian dragons. Cities fell within the hour. The Phyrexian invasion had begun. Dominaria's coalition forces fought desperately. Urza assembled the 9 Titans, a team of planeswalkers who infiltrated Phyrexia directly to strike at Yawgmoth. The mission was catastrophic. Most of the Titans died, others were corrupted, and Urza himself was captured. Yawgmoth showed him visions of a perfect multiverse reshaped by Phyrexian ideals, a cosmos without suffering, disease, or conflict. And Urza liked what he saw. The man who'd spent thousands of years fighting Phyrexia switched sides in the final hour. His trauma, his obsession, and his guilt over the brothers' war, Yawgmoth used all of it to break him and to win him to his side. Yawgmoth manifested on Dominaria as a death cloud, a sentient miasma of entropy that dissolved everything it touched. He was no longer physical, he was pure destruction, and nothing could stop him. The coalition was losing, Dominaria was dying. Then Gerard Capuchin, the reluctant hero, the man who'd never wanted the Legacy, made a choice. That choice was to kill Urza. He took the Power Stone eyes from the fallen planeswalker's corpse and placed them in Karn's chest cavity. The Legacy weapon activated. Every artifact Urza had spent millennia assembling merged together. Karn, Gerard, and the Weatherlight itself became one entity, a weapon capable of channeling enough power to obliterate a god. The weapon fired. Yawgmoth's death cloud was annihilated. The father of machines, who'd existed for 5,000 years, who transformed himself into a god, was finally destroyed. Phyrexia was cut off from Dominaria in an instant. The invasion was over, but the cost was total. Gerard, dead. Urza, dead. The Weatherlight, destroyed. And Karn, infused with the power of the Legacy weapon, he ascended. His planeswalker spark ignited. Phyrexia was defeated. Old Phyrexia, the 9 spheres, the legacy of Yawgmoth, all of it collapsed without their god. The threat was over, or so everyone thought. Karn became a planeswalker with the best of intentions. He'd been created by Urza as a weapon, but programmed as a pacifist. Now, with godlike power, he wanted to create life, to build something beautiful. He created a plane called Argentum, a perfect metal world where life could evolve naturally. He seeded it with organisms and watched them grow. It was his masterpiece, but Karn made a fatal mistake. When he'd been part of the legacy weapon, he'd been exposed to phyrexian corruption. A single drop of glistening oil had contaminated him, and when he'd created Argentum, that oil transferred to his new plane. It was microscopic, undetectable, but it was still alive and powerful. Karn left Argentum to explore the multiverse, believing his creation was safe. Oh, how he was wrong. The glistening oil spread like wildfire. Slowly at first, it infected the organisms Karn had created, changed them, and it began building something new. Phyrexia was dead, but Phyrexian ideology, the belief in completion, in perfection through transformation, that could never die. It was encoded in the oil itself. The plane of Argentum became Meriden, and beneath its metal surface, something was growing. Years passed, decades, then centuries. Then Karn finally returned to check on his creation, and what he found was a nightmare. Meriden had been infected. The Phyrexian oil had spread throughout the plane, transforming its very core. And deep in the planet's interior, 5 beings had emerged. They called themselves Praetors. Each one embodied a different color of mana, each one led a different faction, and together they were rebuilding Phyrexia according to their own visions. Karn tried to stop it. He descended into Meriden's core to confront them, but they captured him. The Praetors were not like the old Phyrexia's hierarchy. Yawgmoth had been an absolute god. The Praetors were 5 competing visions of perfection. There was Elesh Norn, the White Praetor, believed in unity through faith, the Grand Cenobite who would reshape new Phyrexia in her image. Urabrask, the Red Praetor, valued freedom and individuality. He protected Marin refugees in his domain. Vorinclex, the Green Praetor, embraced predation and survival of the fittest. Jin-Gitaxias, the Blue Praetor, pursued knowledge and experimentation without moral limits. And finally, Sheoldred, the Black Praetor, sought power through corruption and political manipulation. They fought each other as much as they fought external threats. New Phyrexia was a plane constantly at war within itself. But they did agree on one thing: Meriden would be completely completed. The plane's surface populations, Mirans who'd lived there for generations, found themselves hunted, corrupted, transformed into Phyrexians against their very will. Some resisted. Heroes like Koth and Elspeth fought back, but slowly, new Phyrexia consumed Meriden. Karn remained in prison for years. The Praetors used him as a power source, draining his planeswalker spark to fuel their expansion. Eventually, he was rescued, but the damage was done. Meriden was lost. New Phyrexia had fully formed. And Elesh Norn had consolidated power. She eliminated her rivals, dominated the other Praetors, and established herself as New Phyrexia's true leader. She had a vision, not just conquering one plane, not just completing Meriden. She wanted to complete the entire multiverse and every plane that it held. When the Omen Paths opened, stable portals between planes created after the Phyrexian invasion, Elesh Norn saw opportunity. No longer were the planes separated by the blind eternities, now anyone could travel between worlds, and new Phyrexia could invade everywhere at once. Elesh Norn built Realmbreaker, a massive world tree that could pierce through planes like a spear. Its branches would spread across the multiverse, and Phyrexian forces would pour through. She activated her sleeper agents, planeswalkers who'd been quietly completed over years, their minds rewritten to serve Phyrexia. There was Tamio, Luca, Ajani, Jace, Vraska, and Nissa, heroes turned into weapons. The invasion began simultaneously across dozens of planes: New Capenna, Kamigawa, Eldraine, Innistrad, Dominaria, everywhere. Phyrexian forces poured through Realmbreaker's branches. Completed planeswalkers led the assaults. Entire civilizations fell within days. The Gatewatch and their allies fought back desperately, but they were losing. New Phyrexia had planned this for years. They had resources, numbers, and converted heroes on their side, and Elesh Norn stood at the heart of it all, orchestrating the completion of reality itself. But she made a mistake. She invaded Zhalfir. Zhalfir was a plane that had been phased out of existence during the Phyrexian invasion 5,000 years earlier. Urza had accidentally trapped it outside of reality to save it from Yawgmoth. It had been lost ever since. But Teferi, one of the greatest planeswalkers alive, and a native of Zhalfir, had been searching for his home for decades, and during the invasion, he finally found a way to bring it back. Zhalfir returned, not just the plane, but its armies, its heroes, its warriors who had been preparing for war for 5,000 years frozen in time. They struck at New Phyrexia directly. The battle was apocalyptic. Zhalfarian forces stormed through Realmbreaker's branches into New Phyrexia itself. The coalition of multiversal defenders joined them. The Praetors fell, one by one. Elesh Norn, realizing she was losing, tried to activate a contingency plan, a way to spread the glistening oil across the entire multiverse even in defeat. However, she was stopped, and she was killed. And then Teferi did something unprecedented. He used his temporal magic to phase out New Phyrexia entirely, removing it from reality the same way Zhalfir had been removed millennia ago. New Phyrexia was gone. It wasn't destroyed, but it was inaccessible, trapped outside of time and space. The invasion was finally over, but the cost was catastrophic. Entire planes were scarred, millions were dead, and something had changed. The Planeswalker Spark was stripped from nearly everyone who had it in an event called the Great Pruning. The age of Planeswalkers as godlike wanderers was over. And New Phyrexia, though defeated, still exists somewhere, waiting, trapped, but not destroyed. Because Phyrexian ideology doesn't die. It adapts, it waits, and it evolves. And who knows, someday, it might return. Phyrexia is Magic's greatest villain because it's not just evil, it's a philosophy at heart. Yawgmoth didn't start as a monster, he started as a doctor trying to cure a disease. His vision of perfection, eliminating suffering, weakness, mortality, isn't entirely wrong, it's just taken to its absolute horrifying extreme. Completion isn't conquest, it's conversion. Phyrexians genuinely believed they were saving you, making you better. They see flesh as weakness and transformation as salvation. That's what makes them terrifying. They're not cruel for cruelty's sake. They're cruel because they think they're doing the right thing. From the fall of the Thran, to Yawgmoth's death, to Karn's mistake, to Elesh Norn's invasion, Phyrexia has been Magic's constant threat, the enemy that keeps returning because its ideology was never truly killed. Old Phyrexia fell. New Phyrexia phased out. The glistening oil still exists. The belief in perfection through transformation still echoes, and who knows what the future holds. This was a complete story of Phyrexia. 5,000 years of horror, ambition, and the question, what does it mean to be perfect? If this deep dive resonated with you, smash that like button and subscribe. Comment down below your favorite Praetor. Maybe we'll do a video on them next, who knows. Thanks for watching, and remember, all will be one, but not today. We'll dive in again soon.